Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everybody to the regular business meeting for the City of Lake Forest Park City Council. This is Thursday, February 12th at 7 p.m. At this point, I have asked Councilmember Muhlenberg to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'd all stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so next item on the agenda is the adoption of our agenda. I think there are copies of them floating around out there too. Council or Vice Chair Goldman.
Yes, I would like to make a motion to amend the agenda, just a reordering. I'd like to move item 10A to after proclamations.
Is there a second?
Second as amended.
Okay. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, thank you. And I want to acknowledge Councilmember Good on Zoom, as well as City Attorney Pratt. All right. Okay, so next then is public comments. All right, I'll have to read this. The council will not be accepting online public comments. Thanks, Chief. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on agenda items or any other topic the council might have purview or control over. However, the mayor or council may not respond to comments from the public. If the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over, then the mayor or presiding officer may request the speaker suspend their comments. The council may direct staff to follow up on items brought up by the public. Comments are limited to a 3-minute time limit. Okay, and with that, Julian Anderson. Oh.
That makes this up and down. So if you want to talk a little taller, a little shorter, if you'd like to be.
Thank you, Chief. And I'm so happy you did that because we do that every week, right?
I'm happy too, because I knew there was a button here somewhere. Hi, I'm Julian Anderson, resident of Lake Forest Park. And I thank you for your extended consideration of Resolution 26-2061. It's a point of local pride, I think, that so many of the cited resolutions and police department policies and directives are already in place to enable and protect our access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The surge of unaccountable federal troops into Minneapolis caused death and great disturbance to individuals and communities. There's no reason to expect federal surges to avoid Lake Forest Park. This resolution is needed and timely. Except for Section 5, the proposed whereas sections are well stated. Section 5 could be used to suppress some of the police policies we value, especially the duty to intervene and the duty to report. Hope you will consider some modification of this section. I would urge you too to prepare and implement a package of concrete actions that would further implement the intentions of this resolution. Preparation for natural disasters could provide a model. Possible tactics could include pre-positioning of resources like food, water, hygiene products, first aid supplies that, if under occupation, could become scarce or unattainable for folks afraid to be out of their home. 2, undertake active testing of multiple communication modes so city neighborhoods and support groups can keep well informed. 3rd, organize training for residents to be better prepared individually and equipped for foreseeable conflicts with an occupation force. I'm a child of Minnesota, born there, school and college there, later sinking my roots into this place. Even so, for 20 years, I was half-time in Minnesota, managing a group of community newspapers living in Minneapolis. So many of the scenes in recent national reporting are familiar to me. Streets I walked, eateries I enjoyed. So the ugly experiences there recently struck me. But also I was struck by the strength and immediacy of neighborhoods reacting quickly and in large numbers to the activities and excesses of the federal troops. Minneapolis demonstrated a strength that LFP could have. Minneapolis has many groups and organizations that work together for many different purposes: churches, PTAs, reading circles, Loppet training, night out for safety street parties, senior centers, political organizing, food distribution volunteers, environmentalism, and so forth. Not so different than here. Encouraging these groups to keep their communication networks in good working order could prep LFP for quick and massive reactions when needed. So thank you for your work on this important topic. And my PS is, if you need a book to read, consider It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. All right, so next we have, and I'm not really sure how this is working because the names are kind of conjoined, Emily Hallowell and Sally Yamasaki.
Sally Yamasaki, 17868. Do we still have to do that? Oh,
You're good.
that was from a long time ago. Okay. Is it starting already? 3 minutes. Okay. So I am in support of resolution number 2061. I also echo the things that Julian said so well. Thank you, Julian. There are two things, though, I also want the council to revisit. It says, whereas since January 2025, federal immigration agents have caused at least 6 other fatalities. Just to double check that, because I looked at The Guardian on January 28th, 2026, article by Melissa Hellman. It says 8 people have died in the dealings with ICE so far in 2026, not 2025, 2 of which were Good and Preety, and that in 2025, there were at least 32 people who died in ICE custody. So to check that fact. The second one is I would like to see the sections of this resolution have all 8 of the people who have died at the hands of ICE be named and not have 2 named and the 6 of them othered. The other issue why I'm here today, I'd like to comment on is traffic safety on 40th Avenue Northeast and 182nd. This is an issue we have brought up for 17 years. I want to give a historic perspective. Since 1970s, the people of 182nd and 40th have brought the issue of traffic safety to the city. There were traffic studies that were done back then, but nothing came of them. Then in 2009, again, our community took up the plea of traffic calming on our street. We talked with Frank Zank. He mentioned cutting back the shrubbery next to the road for better visibility, as well as then having a place to walk that is not on the road. That was never done either. That is also when some of us on our street began to read about traffic calming. Methods in Netherlands in particular. As we learned, a neighborhood community is like a home. The streets are our hallways. And our neighbors are the hallways to our bedrooms, basically. So you can get a visual idea of what a neighborhood and our street should be like. Instead of making it easy for cars to speed and cut through neighborhoods, putting the onus on pedestrians to watch and always watch out for traffic and run quickly to avoid being hit. In the Netherlands, they make it so that the drivers need to slow down and become aware of the animals, children, elders, dog walkers, joggers, etc., that live in that community. They use methods like narrow lanes, chicanes, speed bumps near crosswalks, brick roads, sharp corners as a few examples. In 2009 is also when our street party started on 182nd for the purpose of street calming. We intentionally closed the street so that, my time's up. So we intentionally closed the street so that we could build community and take ownership of our street, our neighborhood, our hallway. So here we are again in 2026. There's another generation of young children on our streets, and the problem is still here. Only now there's a lot more traffic today in comparison to the 1970s. 17 years of working on this project is a long time. How many years will it take to do something? Please work with our street community this time to get something done. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Welcome.
Thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Emily Hallowell. I moved here to Lake Forest Park with my husband and 3 kids back in 2020. Our kids are now 9, 7, and 5. I'm here today to talk, basically to echo Sally's points about traffic safety on our street. We live on 40th Avenue Northeast, not to be confused with 40th Place. Our street is often used as a cut through from 178th near the Presbyterian Church over to Ballinger. A lot of cars use our short street to bypass the backup that happens where 178th hits Ballinger, that stop sign and that awkward left turn. We see a lot of folks from our community driving down our road, but we also see a lot of traffic coming through from outside our community. A couple of things to note about our street. First, there are no sidewalks. There's no safe walking paths on our street. Our street has a lot of curves and multiple blind corners. On these blind corners, there's also a lot of overgrown shrubbery, making it increasingly hard to see what's coming around the corner. Something else that's interesting to note is that at all 3 intersections, at 178th, at 182nd, where it hits 40th, and at 35th and 182nd, the corners are very round, which means that cars actually don't have to slow down to make the corner. Squaring off those corners would have a dramatic impact on slowing down traffic. Something else to note about our neighborhood is there's an increasing number of young families moving into the neighborhood. Mine is certainly one of them, but as properties come up on the market, it's young families that are moving in. Specifically on the blind corner that we live on, there are 3 separate families with special needs children. I have an autistic son who doesn't have the same danger awareness as a neurotypical child. And so I am especially worried about traffic safety in front of our home and on the street. I can't tell you how many near misses we have a family have had attempting to walk down our street, to have a car swerve around the corner, see us swerve to avoid us, and then have a near miss with a car coming already in that lane. So really in all of this, my hope is that we can work together to improve traffic safety on our street, to introduce calming measures. We have a number of young families living immediately across the street from us. Our kids are all the same age. I would love for my kids to actually be able to independently, safely walk across the street without me there to go visit a friend. We live just 3 blocks from Brookside Elementary, and yet I don't feel safe with my kids walking on the street to go to school. So I have a lot of ideas. I'm certainly no expert in traffic safety measures, but I know there have been studies done, as Sally mentioned, and I really hope we can work together as a community to make these changes. Why I bring this to you now is because with the upcoming roundabout project, if you look at where that sits on the map, as cars start to back up when one lane is closed, there's a flagger, literally the only way around is going to be our street. And so we already see quite a bit of traffic moving above the speed limit. That's going to significantly increase. So now's the time to take action before that project kicks off. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, so next on our list, we have Sarah Phillips. Hello.
Hello, my name is Sarah Phillips, and I'm just here to support Resolution 2061, because I think that this resolution really begins to do what I think is a critical component, which is building a resilient community. It creates partnerships with our police department. We know where the boundaries are. And I think it's important that we reach out and make sure that our residents and our people passing through and our visitors and people working here understand that we're a community that supports them. So thank you very much. I appreciate your work on this.
Thank you. All right, next on the list, we have Dana Campbell. Hi.
Hello, I'm Dana Campbell. I'm a resident of Lake Forest Park since 2012, and I wanted to wish you all a very happy Darwin's birthday and also Lincoln's birthday. And I also wanted to just make a comment that I really love the idea of having a proclamation in support of Darwin, bringing him into the public fore at this time and any time, because his work is extremely important, not just in the biology realm where we may think that he did his great work, but also in almost every possible section of science and in society as well. And I also find it really fitting that we are doing this on his birthday. So I appreciate the thought that went into that. And that's that part. The other thing was that I also really appreciate Resolution 2061. And I think people have said extremely good things about this already, and I echo what they have said. And then also I echo the dangers of not working on pedestrian safety on 182nd Street and 40th. I think that crosswalk as 40th hits 178th is appalling not to have some kind of marking for that intersection. And I think that the city is here to work for the safety of the community, and that would be a high priority, as well as going up that steep, windy hill where there are children and a lot of people of all ages that walk down that hill to the town center. I think encouraging people to walk is one of the greatest things that we can do to counter climate issues that we have in this city. And I appreciate you doing what you can to make that a better place to be. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, we have Jeff Jensen. Welcome.
Thank you. I am a resident of Lake Forest Park. My name is Jeff Jensen. I live up at the top of the hill, up 182nd. I drove here, although the distances are short, because I don't feel safe coming down 182nd at night. So I'll echo some of the other sentiments that were made. I was here in particular to express my support for the proclamation to recognize Darwin for his scientific integrity and foresight. I think that there's a lot of ways in which Darwin is maybe unfairly associated with this kind of mechanistic process by which natural selection works. And I think as we consider some of the other political issues of the day, it's also good to keep in mind that Darwin thought very deeply about the origins of morality. He was clearly a 19th century Victorian gentleman, but in many ways he was very progressive and far-thinking in ways that I think people are less likely to appreciate. So I just wanted to read one short section out of The Descent of Man from Darwin. As man advances in civilization and small tribes are united into larger communities, the simplest reason would tell us each individual that he ought to extend his social instincts and sympathies to all members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. This point being reached, there is only an artificial barrier to prevent his sympathies extending to men of all nations and races. So we live in a time now where people are very actively trying to establish artificial boundaries among us. And so it's nice for us to take this opportunity to think about a more global and far-reaching and more inclusive view of how we treat each other. And Darwin provides us with some of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we have Liz Hawkins. Hello.
I'm Liz Hawkins. I live on 40th. I support the previous speakers. Certainly, we're all on board with strong thoughts about the federal issues and the having Darwin honored and recognized. But government belongs at home. It starts at home, and interest in our individual safety extends to the community around us. And if we take action on safety in our own neighborhood, in our own street, well, other people will pay attention and they'll get that idea too. So many people walk down 182nd and 40th, down to the town center, down to the Presbyterian church. Kids do walk to school. Older kids walk down the street to catch a bus or catch a ride to someplace else. We do have some young people that feel it's a challenge to go fast down 182nd. And I can tell you that the curves down near my house, down near Emily and Sally's house, those curves are a real danger. Traffic calming would be very welcome. And I'll remind you too of one more thing that would be really welcome, as I think Sarah brought up, is that crosswalk that we talked about. I understand there's something in the works. I was told that on good authority. So let me encourage you to get that project in the works, to get it really moving, and to pay attention to the dangers posed when the roundabout project begins. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that's the list. So if there's anybody else in council chambers who'd like to make a comment, please come on up. Okay, yeah, come on up. I apologize for not knowing your name, but if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Absolutely. This is Alan Keast. I'm a resident of the city. Thank you very much. As all of you know, I submitted language a couple of days ago for inclusion under your leadership on the resolution that you're going to be considering. And I appreciated the fact that you did take the leadership. And let me just point out, if you drive down Bothell Way to 145th, turn left to go down to the lake, you're going to pass a street that on the south side has Seattle residents and on the north side, Lake Forest Park residents. Those residents on the south side are today protected by the language I submitted to you, which is exactly what the city of Seattle position is. And my hope is the city of Lake Forest Park will rapidly move to bring the same protection over to the residents of the city of Lake Forest Park. You might also wish to know, what is the stance of King County? And in that regard, I'm going to quote from a recent statement from King County Prosecuting Attorney Lisa Mannion. And a couple of sentences. If someone commits a crime and that case can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, they should expect to see a courtroom. Our laws apply whether you are a civilian or if you are a part of state, local, or federal law enforcement, and ICE agents are no exception. So there's no suggestion that Lake Forest Park should or needs to be breaking any new legal ground, but let's catch up to what our other governments have already done for their citizens and make sure that the citizens of Lake Forest Park enjoy the same protections. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alan. Is there anybody else in chambers? Ken. Right. If you'd introduce yourself.
Yes, Ken Cassover, and I live here in Lake Forest Park. And I'm proud of my city council. I just arrived, so I'm gathering my thoughts here. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about resolution number 26-2061. You'll have to forgive me if I'm just repeating what some other people have said because I haven't been here. I think it's a good start. My initial reaction was to not single out ICE on some of these things, but to apply what we expect for all law enforcement officers. So just a couple of days after I realized that's what I wanted, I saw a judge's decision in California where the issue of wearing face masks, this judge overruled a proposal there to prevent ICE from wearing face masks. And they did that because there's something in the California statute that allows state police to wear face masks. And the judge said, hey, it needs to be equal, across the board. That's consistent with my reaction on this nice proposal that you all worked on, that it needs to be worded equally because this is something we expect out of all law enforcement officers, not just ICE, but including ICE. That's the point. It's I think it should state including ICE. The other thing is that the procedures done after one of these violations that may occur in regard to how people are treated and using proper force. I would like to see our local police department have some sort of encouragement to, unless ordered to do otherwise, to follow up on their normal procedures. To not just go, oh, well, this is ICE, we're staying out of it. Kind of like, go ahead and do whatever they need to do normally, which I'm not the professional here on as far as being a police officer, but whatever they do normally, they should proceed to do until ordered to, maybe by the commanding officer of the person on duty, to do otherwise. So secure the crime scene, take photos if necessary, whatever it is that they normally do, I would like the document to encourage that. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you. All right, is there anybody else who'd like to make comment? Okay, so I think then we can close public comment. Oh, yes. I apologize. Wanted to acknowledge our written comments. Alan Keast, and I'm going to be listing Pro 26, 2061, but not going into details about it. So Alan Keast, Joel Paisner, Elizabeth Markey, Rick Bender, David and Jean Farkas. And then there were a couple other comments, Matt and Mary Svensson about traffic safety on 40th Avenue Northeast, and Kim Josund on the Pro Darwin Day proclamation. So thank you all for writing in as well. Okay, now I'll close public comment. Okay, the next item is final confirmation. And so if I can ask Mike Vettersnick to come to the dais. Oh, and thank you.
I just want to say, glad to have Mike back on, hopefully back on the Parks Board. When I started out here, the city was doing the Community Service Commission, and we worked together back 10 years ago. So, yeah, I'll let him tell his experience of his volunteering around here.
Hello, my name is Mike Vettersnick, and I've been a volunteer for a long time in Lake Forest Park. I got started on a community service committee when Mary Jane Goss was the mayor. At that time, I think Linda Holman was kind of running the show, that committee. We did a lot of things around here, as I recall, planted trees, made recommendations. It was a lot of fun. And then we moved on to, I was asked to help out at Animal Acres, and I did a lot of work there, building beds and setting up a tool shed and a bunch of other things that I had help with my next door neighbor, Scott Bowen, on. And they've strangely lasted all this time. So we did something right. And now I'm involved in Blue Heron Park, lifting up the bushes there so you can have a great sight line almost all the way to the creek. It's a nice, safe park now, and there's more work to be done. And what I like about working there is that there's a lot of different people involved in that. As I recall, there's the stream keepers, there's an ecologist that came over to make some recommendations on things. So there's been a lot of professional help in doing what we've been doing. So I was asked to see if I could continue on with the new park board. And it made a lot of sense to me since I do have experience here in the city. And I think I'd be a good volunteer. I could do a lot of work. And I just met the leader and of the board, and seems like a very intelligent person. Would be anxious to work under that person. So that's all I have to say.
Well, I appreciate your comment, and thank you for volunteering. Does anybody on council have a question for Mr. Vettersnick?
What's your favorite tree, Mike?
Scotch pine.
Nice. Good answer. All right, so I guess Councilmember Riddle, then Councilmember Goldman.
So not a question, but just thank you for your volunteerism for all these years. And I'm so glad that you are not tired of it and that you still have that fire. And I appreciate that. And that's the kind of folks I really appreciate having in these
Thank you.
advisory boards. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah, thank you for volunteering to come back to the Parks Board. My question for you, do you have thoughts on either new parks or new amenities for existing parks that you would like to see within the city?
Well, I've had a couple discussions with two people on that very subject. And as I see it, the problem right now is maintenance. And I think I don't think we should be adding, this is my opinion, I don't think we should be adding any new parks until we can come up with a way to maintain them on a regular basis. And that's cutting the grass, pruning, watering, picking up trash and litter, and all those things are very important to keep a park looking great. And I don't know that the city is up to snuff on that. Thank God for a lot of the volunteers that you're very fortunate to have in the city that do a lot of that work for the city right now. So I would not be in favor of adding a bunch of new parks at this time. Again, that's just my opinion.
Thank you, and I very much appreciate your candor.
Of course.
Anyone else? Oh, Councilmember Rosno.
To parallel the tree question, do you have a favorite park?
Well, I do. It's Animal Acres because I've been working there for so long. I put a lot of sweat equity in there, and it's amazing. The master garden plot is there. When I'm watering in the summertime, so many people will stop and ask questions. It's amazing. And especially the little kids that see the garden plots, see tomatoes growing, see onions, see this and see that. And there's been very little vandalism whatsoever at the Master Garden there. And so I found that to be really remarkable because I used to be a teenager at one time. So, I know what kids can do. So it's a wonderful, that park is amazing in my opinion. And so that's my favorite park.
I guess as a maybe more substantive, I mean, that's a substantive answer, but as more meaty question, do you have thoughts on what we can do to engage more of the community or either bring people to parks either as volunteers or just for activities that the city and the Parks Board can be tackling?
That's a good question because most of the volunteering that I see happening, a lot of it is word of mouth. And a lot of the people in this city like to volunteer, at least the ones that I've seen. Every time there's been a cleanup somewhere, a lot of the people that show up, well, honestly, a lot of them that show up are from the Rotary Club. Because Linda Holman grabs people and a lot of them support her, so they'll come. But a lot of the other people that I see there just heard about it from the website. Now, I don't know if everybody in the city is on the website, but the ones that do react to that, and that's good.
I guess one other follow-up is, hypothetically speaking, if there were a new public works director sitting somewhere nearby, what would you want to tell that person about our parks?
I'm sorry, the question was again?
If hypothetically, if you had an opportunity to talk to our new public works director, what would you want her to know about our parks and park maintenance?
It's all about the money. And if the city has the money, then let's hire some more people. If the city doesn't have the money, then we need to get more volunteers to the parks.
Right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Is there anyone else?
Paula?
Yeah, I was looking at Councilmember Good, but okay. All right, all my wonderful colleagues here stole my thunder. I was going to ask you about the favorite park thing, but just wanted to, no problem. I just wanted to thank you for stepping up time and time again. I want to acknowledge your long history with the city and really appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. Okay.
So, council, I'd be entertaining a motion here.
Are we do? No? Any?
I,
Okay.
I will move that we appoint Mike Vettersneck to the Lake Forest Park Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, position 7.
I second. Oh,
All right, wonderful.
yours.
That's been moved and seconded. Okay, is there any further comment? All right, so all those in favor of confirming Mike Vettersneck to the Lake Forest Park Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, position 7, please say aye.
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 Thank
All
you.
those, yeah, all those opposed or abstaining. Okay, congratulations. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving right along, we have the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board work plan for 2026, appropriately enough. So, Mr. Demmer.
Yeah, it's a parks night. Hi, I'm Tyler Dittman. I've been here a few times before. I'm chair of the Lake Forest Park Parks and Rec Advisory Board. I'm happy to provide an update on our work and our annual work plan. The Parks Board meets monthly and is currently composed of me. Amy Hannigan is our vice chair, as well as Steve Feth, Linda Holman, and Maurice Jones Jr. Up until just a couple seconds ago, we had 2 vacant positions, but I'm excited to welcome Mike. And I think there's someone on the agenda for an upcoming meeting for another appointment, which is great. We also have positions available for student representatives, and we're always taking applications. Anybody? We're very pleased to have Councilmember Muhlenberg as our council liaison, and we work closely with Corey Matson as our staff liaison. She's fantastic. Our 2026 work plan was included with your meeting materials, I believe. And as you can see, we have 6 areas that we're focusing on. First, the board remains excited by our ongoing work on our new lakefront park. That is very fun. The past year, we worked with the consulting team to help provide initial ideas and content for some interpretive features of the new park. We had a very informative meeting with the Shoreline Historical Museum, as well as Mayor French, to review records and early photographs of the site. That was pretty interesting, actually. As the work enters the next phase, we are available to help further with more details of the design and the implementation, as well as gather community input where you need it. Our second work plan item is about providing relevant and up-to-date information to residents about a variety of features in the city's parks and using occasional park spotlights or something like that in our e-news and our social media. Each of us on the board knows and loves our parks. Actually, we use them a lot. And we try to share that passion with other folks in the community. The third work plan item is about expanding recreation opportunities. Let's see, those have been very engaging among the board, particularly pickleball. We have some pickleball aficionados for sure. And that inspires great participation and discussion. In prior years, we've also done a yoga in the parks in the summer, and I'm really optimistic we can do it again this coming summer. I know that really gathered a lot of people in the summer. Let's see, we also installed story walks in some of the parks last year, and we expect to do that again this year as the weather gets a little better. Let's see, we're also working on identifying, mapping, and organizing community walking routes and events to connect the parks and the people. And of course, pickleball remains an active community, particularly up at Horizon View, and we do what we can to promote that, to help them with that facility, and to get people playing. The fourth work plan item is for our board to participate in community events to help inform the community and promote our parks. This overlaps a lot with the first item, actually, as it comes to the lakefront park and community outreach. Let's see. We've also made and strengthened connections with other groups in the area that connect with the parks, like the Lake Forest Park Garden Tour, Shore Lake Arts, City of Shoreline Parks, Shoreline Historical Museum, Third Place Commons, and the Stewardship Foundation, all wonderful partners in all the work we do, and more within the city. The fifth work plan item is to support the council and other boards, commissions, and committees on issues that intersect with the parks. And we will continue to do that. And I think there are a lot of good overlaps with a lot of the work that those groups are doing. Finally, our sixth work plan item is a little bit new this year. We're going to work on updating our map and information about our current parks, which we've not done for several years. So I think that'll be a good change. So that's a brief overview of what we have been doing, what we will be doing in the near future. And I'm happy to take questions and comments. But first, I'd like to put on my other hat, although I didn't bring the actual hat. As a troop leader for scouts in our community, I'd like to note that we have 4 scouts in the audience tonight who use parks often. We meet right across from Animal Acres. They're working on their citizenship in the community merit badge. So as they do that, I think they're taking notes and learning from you in particular, from everyone in this room. And I'd like to thank you all, actually, the council members, deputy mayor, all the city staff, all the citizens who participated, and all the volunteers for demonstrating to them, modeling what informed, respectful, productive, and involved citizenry looks like. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Any questions about parks?
Thank you so much, Chair. And yeah, does anybody have any questions? First, I wanted to say thank you for bringing the scouts here, and it's really great to see community involvement on their part. So thank you guys for coming. All right, anybody have any questions? All right, Vice Chair Goldman.
Thank you for the presentation. Not a question, but a comment. I'm the liaison to the tree board. And I know the tree board has spoken about being interested in working with the Parks Board. The tree board has worked with the Stewardship Foundation to develop tree walks. And some of those are partly in city parks. And so I'm hopeful that our two boards can work together to help to implement these tree walks, publicize them to the community.
It's a fantastic idea. I love it. Yes, happy to partner.
Councilmember Riddle.
Following on the walking route theory, collating those and sharing that. So as we look at our street safety, that we can pull in those routes, so to make sure that those routes eventually have safe passage across our city so that people feel safer taking those.
Yeah, I agree. We've worked on a few routes in the past that have gone, we need to close the streets to make them work, right? It's not necessarily a parks function, but more of a recreation function, which I think is a great idea, that we can organize some community walks and actually shut down those streets and get people out and about. Maybe give them an idea of what a street way could look like with sidewalks. They were happy to walk on.
Anyone else? So we're good. No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for the work plan. It's a very ambitious work plan. I don't have anything to add to it except to basically express my appreciation to you and of course the board on coming up with it, and the best of wishes on accomplishing it. I'm really looking forward to the increased social media presence because I think that's one of the ways we get the word out, right? Really. So,
exactly.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to the scouts. I have a scout at home.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here.
All right. Okay. So we have a couple of proclamations. I'll do one, and I think Councilmember Rosano, you're going to do the other. Okay. All right. So the one that I have is about the Day of Remembrance. Whereas on February 19th, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which authorized the United States military to forcibly remove and incarcerate more than 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast, including 12,000 Japanese American residents of Washington State. And whereas the first civilian evacuation order gave Japanese Americans from Bainbridge Island less than 1 week to leave behind homes, personal belongings, farms, businesses, friends, and family, and report to hastily constructed detention centers like Camp Harmony on the grounds of the Washington State Fair in Puyallup. And whereas this drastic course of action allegedly aimed to prevent acts of espionage and sabotage by Japanese Americans who are deemed untrustworthy and disloyal to the United States. And whereas on March 23rd, 1943, the War Department organized a segregated unit of Japanese Americans, many of whom reported for military duty from the concentration camps surrounded by barbed wire in which they and their families were detained. And whereas more than 12,000 volunteers responded to questions about their loyalty and patriotism by amassing a battle record unparalleled in the United States military history with a casualty rate of 314% and earning a collective 7 presidential unit citations, 21 medals of honor, 29 Distinguished Service Crosses, 1 Distinguished Service Medal, 588 Silver Stars, and more than 4,000 Bronze Stars. 22 Legion of Merit medals, 145 Soldiers medals, 9,486 Purple Hearts, one decoration from France and Italy, and in 2010, the Congressional Gold Medal. And whereas in 1982, the Congressional Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians found, quote, no military or security reason for the internment, unquote, of persons of Japanese ancestry but determined the cause of the incarceration as, quote, racial prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. And whereas through this travesty of justice, Japanese Americans suffered immense economic loss of property and assets, immeasurable physical and psychological harm, and were deprived of their constitutional liberties without due process of law. And whereas in 1979, Washington State Congressman Mike Lowry introduced H.R. 5977 to provide reparations and an apology to the Japanese American incarcerees, thus initiating a 10-year legislative quest that ended when President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. And whereas through Washington State, the last remaining survivors of the European and Asian Pacific battlefields of World War II and of American incarceration camps lived their golden years in quiet contrast to their extraordinary acts of conscience and valor, while all of America continues to benefit from the heroic patriotism. And whereas there were no Japanese or Japanese American residents in the Lake Forest Park development due to restrictive racial covenants, and there were several families of Japanese descent within the current Lake Forest Park city limits who were relocated. Now, therefore, the mayor and city council of the city of Lake Forest Park pause to acknowledge the anniversary of the signing of the Executive Order 9066 to recognize and remember Japanese American veterans, incarcerees, and civil rights activists from the state of Washington, and to honor the lessons and blessings of liberty and justice for all, and to proclaim February 19, 2026 as a day of remembrance in the city of Lake Forest Park, and we urge all citizens to join us in this special observance. As a personal aside, my grandparents were interned at Hart Mountain in Wyoming and were later relocated to Tule Lake in California. And so this really hits home for me too, because it was my paternal grandparents and my 4 uncles. So it has special meaning to me. So thanks very much, everyone. All right.
I brought a friend with me to help read this. Whereas February 12th is the anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin in 1809, and whereas Charles Darwin is recognized for the discovery of natural selection as the mechanism by which biological evolution occurs, and whereas Darwin's discovery of natural selection continues to serve as the foundation for ongoing advances in science, health, philosophy, art, education, and many other areas of modern life, informing our responses to climate change and the biodiversity crisis, shaping research on new cancer treatments and space probes, guiding urban planning and the development of AI systems, and whereas Charles Darwin's strength of character is evident in the great courage, wisdom, and honesty required to explore and publish the findings supporting natural selection as the mechanism by which biological evolution occurs and the relatedness of all life on Earth. And whereas the anniversary of Darwin's birth is an appropriate period in which to celebrate, reflect, and act on the principles of intellectual bravery, perpetual curiosity, and hunger for truth, which contribute to the well-being of all people and to promote the use of the best available science to address the challenges facing our society. And whereas Charles Darwin wrote that there is a grandeur in this view of life with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. And whereas the city of Lake Forest Park is rightfully proud of its commitment to biodiversity, ecology, human ingenuity, and scientific integrity, of the benefits that science has brought to our community, and of the many contributions our community members have made to the Darwinian sciences and our understanding of the natural world. Now, therefore, the Mayor and City Council of the City of Lake Forest Park do hereby proclaim Thursday, February 12th, 2026 to be International Darwin Day in the City of Lake Forest Park, and urge all residents to join in this special observance.
Thank you very much, Council Member. I can't think of a more appropriate person. He's our council's biologist. So. All right, so now we're going to go with the amended agenda, and we're going to start the discussion on Resolution 26-2061, reaffirming the City of Lake Forest Park's commitment to community policing, de-escalation, and the protection of constitutional rights. So who wants to kick us off on that one?
Looking at me.
Okay.
I can start. I feel like I spoke a fair bit on this last time, so I'll be brief. But the the proclamation that we just had, remembering the Japanese internment, I just yesterday was reading accounts of ICE purchasing warehouses to use for detention centers that would amount to more capacity just in 1 month of purchases than all 10 of the WRA camps during World War II. This is a moment that I think does call for really thoughtful response and for thinking about what we as a city can do. And I've been really gratified by the feedback that we've gotten from the public and the questions that we've gotten. We've had people writing in and asking, can we have neighborhood captains? Can the city try to coordinate things like that? And I do want to explain some of the, why that isn't in this resolution. That if the city starts organizing things like that, all of it's public record, which is probably not a great idea. So that's happening and that should happen. And if you need help contacting people who are doing that work, I'm sure a lot of us here and in the room can help you find those people. But if the city does it, it opens up a whole other bag of worms. But what we can do is make sure that the city is using existing legal powers and being very thoughtful about what we do to make sure that city resources are not used by ICE, which is something that's been added since the last round of this. And that our policies are, to the degree possible, given all of the complexities of the law around this, they are aligned with the values of the community. And there's been a lot of work, including things that are not in this, but that do address some of the concerns about making sure that body cameras are active and aligning what we do on the scene in that event with things like the Keep Washington Working Act, which put limits on what the police can do in that scenario. So it's a complex landscape, and we're trying to find those limits and make sure we don't go over them while making sure that we're encouraging in every way the city to live out the values of the community. And that's really what this is aimed at. And I really appreciate the feedback that we've gotten, and I think it's made it stronger. So thank you all for that feedback.
Appreciate the recap, Councilman Rosano. And I guess that's where we can start our discussion today then, is that we have heard a lot from the public, which is wonderful. And I'm wondering, we could either act on this tonight or we can continue it for discussion. The question is, from what you've heard from the public as well as the discussion on the dais, do you want to basically take more time in drafting a more careful resolution, or do we have enough to go with tonight? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, any of you. All right, Vice Chair Goldman.
Yes, I also want to thank the members of the public. I think everyone who spoke at this meeting spoke in favor of this resolution. Nearly everybody who emailed us spoke in favor. So I'm glad that we do seem to have community support on this. It's a challenging topic, and that's a big part of why we have this resolution, is to communicate to the public, to try to bring the temperature down, to help with some of their concerns, confusion, and fear. We're not going to be able to solve federal issues, but at least we can reassure them that our local city and police department will remain focused on community policing. I do want to also give thanks to Chief Harden. I know he's been very forward thinking on ways to have our police department engage with the community in professional and forward thinking ways. Turning to Deputy Mayor Furutani's point, we heard some good ideas from the community, both at this meeting, and I know Alan had emailed us with some specific language. At the same time, I want to be mindful that as Mayor French is fond of saying, that the perfect should not be the enemy of the good. If we do decide to approve this resolution as is tonight, I do want to assure the public we will continue on this issue, and that we're not just going to pass the resolution and call it a day. We're going to be looking at, working with the chief as to, what are our current policies regarding body cameras, and do those policies need to be updated, and how do we do that in a thoughtful way that ultimately does help to protect the community. I think this resolution is probably 95% of the way there. I would be willing to act on it tonight with that commitment that we will continue working internally with the council and with staff and the police chief to make sure that we continue serving the community.
All right, thank you, Councilmember. I see Councilmember Good's hand up.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I think that it was an interesting comment that Mr. Case said about aligning with local or, our sister cities, and wondering if, I'm not opposed to the resolution either, but I would like to see us more in alignment with our sister cities since we're so close and that we often partner law enforcement issues with them. So I think that having some sort of alignment there would be appropriate.
All right, thank you. All right, Councilmember Muhlenberg, then Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, I'd like to just pile on to what Paula said. No fewer than 4 of the audience members made comments with suggestions for amendments to this resolution. It was hard to capture all of those comments as they were happening in the room. Alan provided his in writing. That was great. Sally made a very important point, which I think is the othering of the folks who aren't mentioned in this resolution. It was one of the issues I raised a few weeks ago when it was in front of us as well. A lot of people have been impacted by this, and to single out 1 or 2 in that sea of people feels a little wrong to me. So I would like for us to take an opportunity to in some way collect that feedback we got from the audience members so that we can reflect on that and potentially roll some of that into this resolution. And I very much would like to figure out a way to acknowledge all of the victims of ICE and Border Patrol in this period. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Riddle.
I agree that I think we should have all the names in there since we know them. I think having read them in other articles, I think they're often minority names, and we don't want to be that. We want to celebrate their life and what they are bringing to the table and the sacrifices they made as well. Additionally, and I don't know if this had already come up, but one of the things we're seeing is this push against people filming in public. And I don't know if any other organization or has sort of dealt with any language saying that is, it's public space. We're allowed. Many of these offenses against protesters have been offenses against folks who are just recording what is going on. So I don't know if there's language, and that's something our city attorney would have to weigh in on, if there's any way we can say that we are supportive of the ability to videotape when you're in a public space where that is typically allowed. And then I think there was a comment about the date. So that I think that obviously is a quick update, but I think we should put the names in there and maybe just in chronological order. I think would be useful.
Yeah, I will say, I think I'm fairly sure that the 2025, it was a checkbook error. I think I meant to put 2026 there, and but there's no reason that it has to be that way.
Right. We can certainly.
So yeah, I think that's almost a Scrivener's error that we could probably tweak easily. But I would be, in terms of next steps, I would certainly be perfectly happy to either, Larry and I have Councilmember Goldman and I have been doing some of the editing on this, to either pass that to another group to work on and come up with another draft, or to work with folks so that if there's something that's in my head that we don't lose along the way about some of the logic of that. I think that I'm perfectly happy to keep working on it, or to step back and let other people put the finishing touches on it. The observing issue, I know, had been a topic of conversation. And yeah, there is a straightforward First Amendment right that Washington courts and the Ninth Circuit have recognized to observe police activity in public without interfering. Like there's caveats that always get put onto it. So framing that for the resolution may take a little bit of nuancing, not to say that we can't do that, but it may take a little bit of back and forth to get it right, so that it doesn't feel wishy-washy in the end, right? We don't want to make something that actually feels weaker than the strong statement that already might exist in court rulings and in policy. We don't want to weaken policy, and we don't want to go past what what we need for the functional day-to-day operation of the police department. And that's the tricky thing with this, that there's a lot happening that we see in Minneapolis and elsewhere that is so far out beyond the pale that it feels like it should be easy to just say absolutely not, never. But for what our police department does on a daily basis, there may be gray area that we don't want to
overstep.
If I may follow up, I think I would be happy to do one more iteration on this before voting on it, knowing that we all agree. Sounds like, I won't put that, we all agree that this is going in the right direction and something that we want to do. I'd like to vote on it once and get it as close to right as possible. It's my opinion.
And two other quick thoughts. One, to Councilmember Good's point, the language that we added regarding public property was based on language out of Seattle, and just today the county issued a similar order. And so in that sense, that's the most probably substantive change to policy that this calls for, and that is aligned with neighboring cities. So I think we're probably in okay shape there, but happy. And other cities have made similar statements, varying in some ways, but I think for the most part, we are reading from the same hymnal as our neighboring cities. And to Councilmember Goldman's point about coming back to this later, the legislature is meeting and is taking up a bunch of these issues also, including masks and including requirements to record when in the presence of ICE and all sorts of other things that in a month or so, we may have a bunch of things that we need to touch regardless. And so, even regardless of our views on national issues, we may need to come back and revisit this just for those reasons, if nothing else. And
Absolutely.
hopefully it all dies down by then, but
Absolutely.
likely.
But I think I want to bring in a subject matter expert here. I think we have the chief wanting to make a comment.
By no way, shape, or form am I an expert in this. I wish I had the solutions, but I don't. But I do want to say I'm grateful for Council Member Rosenau and Goldman for being diligent about bringing this forward. But I did create a statement that I'd like to read because I know the community would probably like to hear from their law enforcement chief. So thanks for the opportunity to let me speak. I want to begin by acknowledging the very real concerns that members of our community are expressing right now. Events occurring across the country, particularly in the recent fatal shooting of Renee Good in Minneapolis and the others, have understandably have caused fear, anger, and grief. Those emotions deserve to be heard and they deserve to be taken seriously. And tonight you heard some of that, and I appreciate our community. At the same time, my responsibility of chief of police is twofold. First, to protect the constitutional rights and safety of the people of Lake Forest Park. We have demonstrated over the years how much we appreciate protests that are out there because you are doing your constitutional right, and we want to protect that. And second, I want to ensure that our officers operate within the law, within our policies, and within practical realities of policing. We must remain composed and take the time to carefully consider all angles and facts while exercising patience as investigations unfold and as information is reported. Lake Forest Park Police Department is and will remain a community policing agency. Our officers are trained and expected to prioritize de-escalation, the sanctity of human life, and the respect for constitutional rights, including the right to peaceably assemble and to observe or document law enforcement activity from a lawful distance. So that was talked about. We have no problem being recorded. We've been doing this for many years, and there is no issue with any of our community members recording what we do. But I did add the lawfulness because there is a point where obstruction comes into play. Let's see. These principles are not new. They are not optional. They are foundational to how we police. It's also important to be clear about the legal framework in which we operate. Under Washington law, specifically RCW 1093-190, the duty to intervene applies to interactions between Washington peace officers. That statute does not impose a legal duty on local officers to direct or control federal law enforcement officers acting under federal authority. I want to be transparent about that because clarity matters both for the public and for the officers that we ask to do this work. That said, our department policies always go further than the minimum requirements by state law. Our use of force and duty to intervene policies apply broadly to situations where any law enforcement officer's actions are clearly beyond what is objectively reasonable, and they require our officers to act when they are in a position to do so safely. They also require officers to render and summon medical aid at the earliest safe opportunity when someone is injured. These policies are trained, reinforced, and taken seriously. When Lake Forest Park officers encounter federal law enforcement personnel in our city, our expectation is professionalism, coordination, and safety. Our officers are directed to identify themselves. That, by the way, is state law in our state. We have to be identifiable. So whether we're wearing a mask or not, you have to be identifiable. To confirm the identity of other armed law enforcement personnel when circumstances allow. That is a policy that I put in place last October, which I'm not going to get into the Keep Washington Working Act, but that prohibits us law enforcement in our state to obstruct, hinder, or get involved with any ICE-related investigations. But we don't know if they're legitimate law enforcement agents. So we do have a policy that we're going to identify if they're doing legitimate law enforcement. We do not enforce, oh, I'm sorry, let me back up here. And we focus on de-escalation, scene safety, and the protection of life. We do not enforce federal civil immigration laws. And we do not participate in federal enforcement actions absent of lawful and clearly defined role. We go back many years where we do not get involved with anybody's immigration status. We do not care. When we pull you over for a speeding ticket and you are undocumented, we do not care. That is the federal government's job and immigration's job. That is not your local law enforcement. If you're a victim of any kind of a crime, that we do not care. We want you to come in and report it. We don't send anybody that needs to be going to the federal government for any investigations. If we find out that you're here undocumented, we don't care. So I want to just get that point across to everybody. I also want to be clear about something else. Our officers will not ignore excessive force. Now, I explained earlier that our state law is duty to intervene is with Washington General Authority officers, not federal officers, but we will not ignore excessive force, nor will we turn away from their duty to protect life. At the same time, we must avoid creating policies or expectations that place officers in legally ambiguous or unsafe positions or that suggest authority they do not have. So striking that balance is not about avoiding responsibility. It's about ensuring accountability that is lawful, realistic, and effective. The resolution before you expresses solidarity, sympathy, and values that align with this department's mission and our city. Section 1 and 2 speak to compassion and our community, and I see no issues with those statements. Section 3, as discussed, is best understood as affirming our existing commitment to de-escalation, constitutional policing, and professional coordination, not as creating a new legal standard beyond what state and federal law allows. My commitment to this council and to this community is this. Lake Forest Park Police Department will continue to train for clarity, restraint, and accountability. We will continue to refine our policies when they are needed, and we will continue to protect the rights, dignity, and safety of everyone in our community. And so many of the things you talked about tonight, and I wrote this last time you were discussing this, are being talked about in this statement. Very much aligned with what the councilor is talking about tonight. So thank you for letting me make that statement.
Appreciate their comment. Thank you, Chief. All right, Councilmember Riddle.
And just to make a comment, this is the value of us having our own police department. They listen to us. They can build policy around what we need as a community, specifically to our community. So I really appreciate the effort that the chief and all that went into formulating these policies. You know, nothing's perfect, but we appreciate all the effort that you put in to do the best you can within, of course, the state laws and other things. But so appreciate that. Thank you, Chief.
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Goldman.
Yeah, thank you for that statement. I was wondering if I could ask you a question, Chief. Would you be able to briefly summarize the current police department policy on body cameras?
When they go to calls, the camera is on. And that could be from traffic stops, their calls will always be on. And especially if there was a call to us that immigration was doing some kind of enforcement anywhere in our community and officers were responding, they turn their body cameras on. And then that is recorded. Every interaction that they have that is recorded per policy holds for 60 days. So at any time in those 60 days, we can go back and refer to that documentation. If it's an incident where obviously this is a hot topic, that data would not leave after 60 days. We would tag that with a case report and that information would be there. So I know that there's state law that's being looked at in the legislation right now about body cameras and masks and reporting. All of those things we would have been doing anyway. It's just being put a focus on it right now. But body cameras would be turned on and they would be used in all of those cases.
Thank you very much for confirming that. Seems to me then that if we do take, our next meeting is on the 26th, if we take another go at making some improvements based on public feedback, that what the public is requesting regarding body cameras is essentially reaffirming our current policy. Now, obviously, we would have our city attorney and police chief verify that, but it does seem like we're broadly in agreement on that, which is very reassuring to hear.
All right, and if I can make a comment, one of the things I wanted to mention is that I appreciate Mr. Keith's comments, and I think people on the dais have acknowledged that, but also Mr. Cassover's comment about don't single out ICE. I think covering all law enforcement officers, yeah, I'm on the fence about that one because specifically, we tried to make the language so that it was more broad, but there are still several references to immigration per se. So that might be something we look at. And also to Mr. Anderson's comments about how does individual prep, I think Councilmember Rosano stated it very well that there are limits to what the city can do until it becomes public information. So there are some things that probably that we can take from there that are more general that will help people prepare. And I think the analogy to natural disasters was very well taken. The fact that, we should be preparing for all sorts of manner of disruption. So I think there might be something there too. Now, that said, I'm very much okay with the language in this particular resolution in front of us. I don't think that rules out the fact that we could have another resolution that, as Councilmember Rosano pointed out, our state legislature is looking at a lot of different topics that are allied with this, and we might have to basically come up with a resolution anyway to show how we're complying or being consistent with state policy. So I will ask the council then, do you want to take a vote on this tonight, or as Vice Chair Goldman said, should we form a group to study this for the next 2 weeks and then come back on the 26th? You can make a motion because that'll help us decide.
I would make a motion that we table this for 2 weeks and take a pass at some minor edits.
All right.
A second.
Thank you. Okay. Do we need to actually vote on the table?
We do have to once a month.
All right,
yeah.
then the motion is to table this for 2 weeks and have a smaller group study it.
So if I may, on point, who should that small group be? I know Councilmember Rosano and I have taken the lead on getting the resolution to this point. I'm happy to continue working on it. I think from this discussion, we have a pretty good idea of where we want to make additions. I'm happy to continue, but if others would like to bring a fresh pair of eyes, I'm also happy to pass that off to others.
And yeah, I certainly feel similarly. One or the other of us probably should stay involved just to have continuity, but
we can have up to 3 and it doesn't make a quorum.
I'm delighted to bring another pair of eyes and help contribute to this.
Councilmember Muhlenberg, thank you very much for volunteering. Since you did say one or the other, does anybody else also want to participate in this? Okay, I think then we'll just go with 3. We'll go with Rosano, Goldman, and Muhlenberg. Okay.
Yes, 3 is the magic number because it's just short of a quorum, so there's no public meeting issues.
All right. I think are we ready to vote on the motion then? Okay, seeing no other discussion, all those in favor of tabling Resolution 26-2061 until the next meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we record, Councilmember Good, you're on mute. Okay, here we go. All right, thanks a lot. And
And with the deputy mayor's
well,
blessing.
can I finish the vote?
Oh,
Oh, is there anybody abstaining or
yeah,
naysaying? Okay,
thought I heard us
all
all,
right.
sorry.
So the motion carries. Go ahead.
Would it be okay if I read out the names from 2026, since this seems to be important for the community?
I think so, because that way we can actually get that recorded in the record. So thank you.
Because it may, unfortunately, there may be more names by the time we meet again, but I may get some of these pronunciations wrong as well. Luis Gustavo Nunez Caceres, Geraldo Lunes Campos, Victor Manuel Diaz, Parody Law, Renee Nicole Good, Luis Beltran Yanez Cruz, Herbert Sanchez Dominiquez, Alex Preddy.
Thank you, Councilmember. All right. So I will trust that the small group will meet at a mutually agreeable time, and we'll come back on the 26th and look at the revised resolution. Thank you very much, Council, for your work. Okay, so moving on to the consent calendar. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All those in favor of the consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, consent calendar is approved unanimously. All right, one thing I want, before we move on to the next thing, I want to acknowledge is that in the consent calendar, some of you noticed that there's a group of volunteers that I really do want to recognize. They're the reappointments to the various commissions and boards that we have. So I want to call out Sherry Finazzo, position 4 of the Planning Commission, Sam Castic, position 6 of the Planning Commission, Mark Phillips, position 3 of the Tree Board, Richard Saunders, position 4 of the Tree Board, Maurice Jones Jr., position 5 of the Parks and Rec Board, and Tyler Dittman, position 4 of the Parks and Rec Board. Thank you very much again for basically your service, and I really appreciate all of the volunteers. Thanks again. Okay. Yeah, let's give a round of applause. All right. Yeah. All right. Okay.
I do wonder, while we're talking about those, do we want to take a minute to just talk about the process by which people can apply and sort of how that, it feels like there may have been some confusion in the community about how boards and commissions are appointed. Do we want to just sort of do a very quick summary of that for the public knowledge?
I mean, I'm happy to do that. Yeah. So if you want, and this is to the audience at home too, as well, if you want to apply for to be a volunteer on one of these boards or commissions, I would suggest going to the city's website. There's a application form there. I had to search under application for board, something like that, and that took me directly there. Otherwise, it's reasonably difficult to navigate there. I think Clerk McLean, am I wrong about that?
Yeah, that's kind of, it's a hard to find spot, and I can send out a news release again. Usually we send out a news release every couple months to asking for volunteers.
That'd be great. Thank you for doing that. Okay, so once basically your application has been received, it's referred to the appropriate department head and then to the mayor. Generally, the mayor then calls you in for an interview. And at that point, unless there's some big red flag, your name is appearing on the council calendar for this final confirmation that we did like tonight for the Parks and Rec Board. So I think it's a relatively, we try to make it as painless as possible because we realize your time is valuable and we really do want to encourage people to volunteer for the community.
Yeah.
You want anything to add?
No, I think that's the important information for people.
Okay, thanks a lot for the reminder. All right, so moving on to the next thing, picking up our amended agenda, I think we have ordinances and resolutions for introduction and referral. Resolution 26-2063, authorizing the mayor to sign amendment number 1 to AG 24-026 with facet for the Phase 2 lakefront improvements for design, engineering, environmental review, and permitting project.
Yes, so city received a SEPA appeal on the determination of the non-significance with mitigation measures. The hearing date has been delayed to start February 24th. Now needing us to extend this current contract for the Phase 2 Lakefront Park project. So we are not asking for funding at this time, but with the delays and moving this forward, there'll probably be a funding request at a later date. But this is on hold. We're at 70% design. Until the hearing exam is over, then we can continue moving forward with design and permitting to go out to construction bid.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Ms. Mattson? Councilmember Riddle.
Is there some expectation of how much more time this would take on Fawcett side?
It depends on the hearing and what happens following. We think we have a good design, and so hopefully too much won't be needing to adjust after that. And they should be able to continue on fairly quickly. So this is a extended probably longer than we need it, but we're just.
Yeah, because it's a extension of the hearing date, not like a second. You don't expect there to be a lot more work because we already had a hearing date in place?
The hearing exam he'll decide if we need to make alterations to our current proposal.
Okay.
And so.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I have the one question, which is just for the benefit of people who have just joined us or new council members. This is a pre-existing amendment that we're just changing literally from the deadline, or not the deadline, but the end date being January of 2026 to December of 2026.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So there's nothing substantive changed.
Nope, just the date right
Okay.
now.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none. Go
Your
ahead.
point about possible future funding is if there are changes required, then
Yeah, the
that'd be
hearing.
outside the
Yep,
scope of the agreement, is that?
correct.
I'd entertain a motion for this, or is there a time, is there a time sensitivity to this?
I mean, I guess we're already past the.
Yeah,
end of
we're
the contract,
we're
right?
we're past January, so yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. You
Yeah.
caught me in a moment.
Okay.
Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director. The extension request is more of a function of the design contract. It's not directly related to the public hearing that's forthcoming or anything for the staff review. So from my point of view, there is no time constraint. But I would ask, what is the current deadline in the current contract? And that more or less would inform when this decision needs to be made.
And that current sorry, Director Hoffman, and that current deadline being
That would be.
December 31st.
of
26.
No, the current.
Oh, the current, I think it was January 30th.
okay. So it's to get our ducks in a row, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so go ahead, Vice Chair.
Yeah, it seems like this is fairly non-controversial. Our new standard policy would be to not approve it tonight, but to put it on the consent calendar for the February 26th meeting. Is that something that would be amenable to your department?
Given the circumstances, I have no issue with that.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, in that case, I'd like to make the motion that we waive our three-touch rule and that we place Resolution 26-2063, authorizing the mayor to sign Amendment 1 to AG 24026 with Facet for the Phase 2 lakefront improvements, that we put that on the consent calendar for February 26th.
Second.
Okay, and I'm just going to make a quick clarification with the city clerk and the city attorney. That's that's almost a joint motion, but that's okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
It's
fine.
nods. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right, so we have the motion on the table. Is there any further discussion on it? Okay, let's take a vote. All those in favor of, we're going to waive the three-touch rule and place resolution 2063, I won't read it, on the consent calendar for February 26th. Please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All those abstaining? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, next we have a resolution for action, and it's a really wonderful one. Resolution 2064, confirming the appointment of Nova Heaton as the Public Works Director.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Tonight we have Nova Heaton with us, which we're happy to present her to you. As you know, we've had a notice out to fill the Public Works Director position. We had several applicants, interviewed three panels that included 3 council members and the city attorney, city staff. And out of that, all 3 panels recommended hiring or making a recommendation to the mayor to hire Ms. Nova Heaton to fill the position of Public Works Director. We then had some second interviews just with some additional staff that confirmed our suspicions, so to speak. And so before you tonight is the resolution 2064 to confirm the appointment of Nova Heaton as recommended by the mayor. There is sufficient funding, obviously, in the current adopted budget for this position, and we ask that you act on this tonight. And feel free to invite her up and ask some questions.
Okay. And if you would like to come to the dais, that'd be great. All right. Well, thank you for being here. And does any of you council members have a question for our potential Public Works Director? Go ahead, Councilmember Riddle.
When can we get sidewalks? Sorry.
Great question. And sort of like the answer with parks, we are going to be balancing need with funding. And so I think that that's really important. And I do have a pretty strong background in complete streets and public safety. Traffic calming is one of my passions. I think that we'll be looking at trying to find solutions that make sense on a short-term and a long-term scale. And searching for funding. A way to get funding is to make sure we have plans that make a lot of sense. So in my past experiences, I have put together 2 different complete streets policies for both Arlington and City of Snohomish. I've also done the local road safety plan for the City of Snohomish. In all of that, I've always done some form of a multimodal improvement plan. And that's where we start to really talk to the community, find out what they need, where are the needs. The Parks Board member mentioned the pathways. That would be a part of that multimodal improvement plan. So we target, we make some plans that make a lot of sense, and then we go after the funding to try to get some state and federal funding to help us bridge the gap.
Follow-up question, if I may.
Absolutely.
In your experience, do you think larger packages are more successful at getting funding or the smaller ones, or does it just depend on what day and the weather?
An attractive package has a lot of pieces to it. So it's probably a little bit easier to get the smaller ones. So easy gap projects are fabulous. You know, if we're filling a gap, it shows a lot of need. Close to schools, also great. But sometimes a big package is also, it has all the different pieces and parts, and it can be, they can visualize how great it's going to look on their resume, the funders, on their resume, to put this project out to bid and have it on their docket.
Awesome. Thank you. That's very informative. I appreciate your comments, Bunch.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Councilmember Rosano?
As you heard tonight, we've got a pretty engaged community. People have some opinions about what we should be doing with our public works in Lake Forest Park. Can you talk a little bit about how you've handled public outreach and in previous and what your thoughts are about how you might proceed here?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to get involved in this community that's clearly very thoughtful and caring. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of ideas. The people that live on the streets, that live near the parks, that visit the parks, have some of the best ideas. So it's really about meeting with the people, My door really is always open. I'm very excited to start meeting with the different people who have passionate views and passionate thoughts. I will balance that with, we have to have some way to evaluate projects and move forward. So one of the first things I would be doing would be looking at our transparency and our evaluation process for projects, checking out where we're at right now. Is it in place? Does it need to be put in place? And moving forward with that in a community involvement sort of situation. So we as a community can kind of agree on the factors that are most important to us when we make these decisions about which project moves forward first, because there's always going to be the difficulty of funding and how do we balance all that. And so I really want to be thoughtful about it. I want to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions. I'm a big fan of pulling out a city map and drawing on it, putting stickers on it, writing notes, and starting to really map out different ideas and plans. You'll see, I love Sharpies of all colors, rainbow Sharpies in my office as we work through, thinking through different ideas. Is this a walking path? Is this a biking path? Is it both? Different things like that. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Lindberg?
How have you been successful at soliciting public feedback in the past in some of your other roles? We've got a great set of citizenry. There's a core group to it that we see and talk to all of the time. We love that. But how do we also get more of our city involved in that conversation?
So I'm not sure I have all the answers in that because it is difficult because certain people like different ways of communicating. So I think that, the key is trying to hit multiple different alleyways for getting the communication out there, not just relying on social media, not just relying on mailings, not just relying on our website, right? We're going to need to work different angles. I also, in Snohomish, right away, we instituted Public Works open house twice a year. So we have one I had one in the spring and in the fall. And so that would be first on my agenda would be to start getting that set up so that the public knows that we're going to have the Public Works open house at these different dates. They're all invited to come. We'll talk about the hot projects. We will hear their input, their feedback. But then we also need to be able to not everybody can make it to a meeting, right? So we need to do other ways of outreach, utility billing, mailings sometimes, online surveys, but also just probably working towards meeting with the different community areas at where they're from as we move forward too. So I know my first year is really going to be a lot about fact finding and really getting to the heart of the problems. I've definitely heard that there are problems to be solved. I'm excited about that. At my heart, I am a problem solver. I want to hear the problem. I want to think about the different ideas, start coming up with solutions. I'm also pretty creative. And so I think sometimes we can come up, especially with the community that's supportive of creativity, we can come up with some exciting ideas for that traffic calming like they're talking about that we could put in place faster. And maybe it's not our permanent solution, but at least it's getting us moving in the right direction.
Wow. All right. Anyone else? Go ahead, Ms. Spencer.
Yes, I think we've had the perfect is the enemy
Yep,
of the get it
good.
done now.
Yep.
We do need improvements, and if it's an iterative process, I think that that intrigues me, and I'd like to talk to you more about that.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. I know my first few months is going to be a lot of meetings, so I'm ready. Let's sit down. We'll talk. We'll take notes. We'll get everything we know about on the table and start from there. And then we'll start to dig into the community, try to get more information from them as well.
Well, Ms. Heaton, I'm very appreciative of your being there and willing to work with the city and work for the city. And one of the things that I'm sure that the city administrator Hill pointed out is that we have the safe streets as well as the safe highways roadmaps that we developed. I think what was it, 2018, 17, something like that. Yeah, yeah. So those. Because of the pandemic and because of other factors, of course, we've had to not do much of that. And I'm really looking forward to picking that up with you. I also appreciate your extensive experience in Whatcom and Snohomish counties, especially most recently in the city of Snohomish itself, very similar in size to us. So you're understanding basically when we don't have a whole lot of staff to do a lot of the things, right? Which I really appreciate your background in. The question I have for you is, you're now in a new county for your professional experience. How different do you think it's going to be now that perhaps basically the contacts that you had made in those other counties aren't necessarily valid?
I think every community has its own way about things and its own problems and its own challenges. But engineering at its heart is a science, and it's an evolving science. There's constantly new ideas out there, new trials to run, different ideas. So at the heart, what I do doesn't matter where I'm at, but it does in whether or not the community is accepting towards it, whether they're interested in it. I am pretty excited about coming to a more progressive community and county to start to maybe work towards some of those ideals that I hold very true to myself. So I also, engineering is a really small world. And so you end up kind of knowing a lot more people than you think you're going to, but I'm also just excited about making those connections as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, Vice Chair.
Sort of on the topic of connections, so while the city owns much of the public infrastructure, we do work with other agencies. For instance, we have 2 state highways through the city. The county owns the Berkeley Trail. This always amazes me, but we are served by 4 different water districts, 2 different electricity providers. And so do you have experience working with outside agencies to maintain all of those public resources?
Absolutely. So, I mean, that kind of goes into all the different cities. They all have different partners. Community transit is big up in Snohomish County. So they're the transportation partnership that we work with. WashDOT obviously 2 highways go through Arlington, and then Snohomish has Highway 9 going right through it. So we've worked very closely with them. I think that I haven't had the opportunity to work with a water district yet, so that'll be fun and new for me, but that was because Snohomish was its own water purveyor. So I've got the experience there of what that's like, and then we'll be working with the outside water purveyors for that.
Thank you.
I won't ask you yet what your favorite park is, but do you have a favorite traffic calming method?
I don't know that I have a favorite because, like my favorite tree, it's the right species for the right location. So traffic calming really depends on the ADT, the speeds, everything that's going on there. So my favorite traffic calming is the right thing for the right location. I have put a lot of our RFBs in place, which are the rapid repeating flashing beacons. And those have been pretty easy to get funded. And in Snohomish, we actually had our streets crew doing the installation. So really makes it very cost effective if we can work with our own maintenance crew to do the work, to improve their abilities to do the work. And then you get a lot, it's like about $15,000 to purchase them. And then that brings your cost down versus if you're paying somebody to do it, you're talking like $100,000. So it's a big difference in cost if we can use our own resources.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything? Somebody want to make a motion?
I will go ahead and move that we pass resolution 26-2064, confirming the appointment of Nova Heaton as the Public Works Director.
Second.
All right, so moved and seconded. Okay.
Do we need to waive the 3-touch rule on this?
I guess we do. I think we do. Do we have to do it first?
I move that we waive the 3-touch rule and.
We can do a motion within a motion.
Yeah, I think we could do that.
Okay. I'll second.
Okay, so the motion on the table right now is to waive the 3-touch rule on resolution 2061.
Oh,
64, sorry. Almost made a fatal mistake there. Okay. All right. So for those in the audience, we waive the 3-touch rule because the council's governance manual suggests that we examine a piece of legislation 3 times before we act on it. There are some things that require some expediency, like for instance, appointing somebody to a new job. And that's the reason why the council members made their motion. All right. So that said, does anybody want to speak to this motion on tabling the 3-touch rule?
Well, I think expediency, and I don't think there will be anything different in 2 weeks if we were to look at it again. So I think it's important for us to do this today.
And just for point of clarification, the anticipated start date is February 23rd. So we would appreciate you waiving the three-touch rule.
Yes, that would probably be best, yes.
Yes, and the start date. Thank you for that.
All right. So I think we'll go to a vote then. All those in favor of Resolution 2064?
Three-touch rule.
Oh, sorry, this is the three-touch rule. Thank you for correcting me. Three-touch rule, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Now we can speak to the motion itself, which is to confirm the appointment of Nova Heaton as the Public Works Director. Any further comment? Go ahead.
I'm excited to have somebody in the role and appreciate your answers tonight. They're very thorough and responsive. Thank you very much.
Here, here.
And I'd like to see more of that.
Okay. And
I am similarly excited. I'm very passionate about multimodal improvements. I think you'll find that most of us, if not all of us on the council, are similarly enthusiastic. So I am really glad to hear you say that that's something you're passionate about as well.
you had me at Sharpie. All right.
I
So
was ready to offer you, to lend you one of my printed out maps of the city, but I'm sure you'll be able to get your own. And even though you did not say Wooner, I will accept the answer that you gave on favorite traffic calming.
you rarely get the answers to the quiz right then and there. That's great. Okay, thank you. All right, those in favor of Resolution 2064, confirming the appointment of Nova Heaton as Public Works Director, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed or abstaining? All right, congratulations. And thank you, City Administrator. All right, so moving on, council discussion and action. Does anybody have any items for that? I think we'll move forward then. Other business, does somebody want to make a motion excusing Councilmember Saunders from tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Okay. All right, it's moved and seconded. I don't think there's really a whole lot of comment here. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All those against, nay. This is also a council tradition that when we excuse a council member, there's always one nay vote. I don't know. Okay, I'm just a slave to tradition. Okay,
Is that in the governance manual?
that's in the governance. It's not. All right, so council committee reports, council member reports, we've kind of combined this. So if you want to report about, if you're a liaison to a committee, a council committee, you're welcome to make that report. You're also welcome to make reports about other committees that you're on. So, let's share.
Three things, but I will try to be brief. The tree board met last week. One of the things they've been planning for some events, for instance, the Green Fair. They're going to be at that and working on tree walks as part of that. Also, they're looking at some housekeeping amendments to the tree code. They already approved sending us the exceptional tree diameter changes. They're also looking at some other housekeeping items just to help clean up the tree code. I think currently their plan is to sort of bundle that and send that to us as a council as one package. Seashore Transportation Forum met last week. We had heard updates on with the state legislative session, which is roughly halfway through. And also a presentation about just disaster sort of climate preparedness. And a third one, this is homework for everybody. We will be having our council retreat on the 21st, but also we will be having our committee of the whole meeting on Monday, the 23rd. There's going to be two agenda items. The first is the governance manual, and the second is the planning commission work plan. Regarding the governance manual, council members Good, Riddle, and I have been working on it. We are hoping to send you a version via the city clerk. And then if you have feedback, come to that committee of the whole if you have specific ideas, or send those to the city clerk. And then regarding the planning commission, at our last meeting, we heard that the planning commission would like a bit more specific guidance on work plan items. And so the homework assignment for the COW on the 23rd, focusing on housing and affordability. Please come to that COW with specific things that you would like the planning commission to look at. And again, we'll try to distill those down and see if there's a consensus as to what we would like to have them. They'll be presenting their work plan on our meeting on the 26th, but I think the feedback I heard from Councilmember Rose now is that they would appreciate some more specific thoughts on what we would like them to look at. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, and Tuesday, so if you're done, I can jump into the report on their meeting on Tuesday.
Yes, I'm done now.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, it was a lot of discussion of sort of organizing and planning for the year's work and sort of finalizing a work plan. And the question that they posed was, yeah, about in terms of affordability, there's sort of the distinction made between a big A and little a, between, do we just sort of market forces, or are we trying to put money into compelling something to stay affordable in a certain way, and how much a priority would the council like to see in one of those directions or the other? And is it more about just removing those barriers and thinking about what incentives we might be able to offer? And there are a few that they have a list already in mind of levers that might be able to maneuver that. And or there are other aspects of affordability that we'd like them to be thinking about. And this connects back to discussions that long-run discussions about cottages and other housing forms, and how that might be shaped by decisions that follow from that. And so it was a lot of the discussion that was happening there was more that sort of conceptual, how do they approach as a body these big challenging questions? So continuing the discussion that we had jointly with them, and sort of trying to figure out, yeah, what comes first? How do we define, what are the criteria that we're looking at in terms of what kind of housing Lake Forest Park wants and will have, and then how to get to that endpoint through the code.
Right. So, any other committees you want to report on?
That's the only one I went to. So yeah, I think that covers
Anyone
it.
else?
The NUSA had their board retreat, so I can't talk too much about it, but the intention is for them to have another affordable housing week like we had last year. So more to come on that and what the specifics are of that, but it does tie in quite well to the last report. So looking forward to seeing maybe some planning commissioners at some of those events.
All right, so
I did attend Parks and Recreation Board. They reported out themselves tonight, so not a lot of added detail there, but what an amazing group of very engaged citizens that had really great ideas about how to bring people into our parks, get more engagement in our parks, take care of our parks. Really excited to be a liaison to that group.
Wonderful.
I will also say that the Planning Commission, Maddie Larson and Daniel Cluino are both cycling off after very long service, both of them.
Yes.
And so it was also a chance to just thank them and be very appreciative of many years of service to the Planning Commission that they have.
Oh.
And I think that Maddie is going to be presenting the work plan
right
so we get to see her in that capacity
and
still.
we should thank both of them at that time as well. So yeah, thank you for the reminder. Yes, there are some really long-serving members of our volunteer boards and commissions, and we don't do enough to acknowledge their work, and it's really appreciated. All right, for my part, got a couple of things. One of them is that council members, you had a couple of handouts on your desk, and it may have been widely available too. I just want to acknowledge Emily Halliwell, who gave us the traffic safety on 40th Avenue Northeast handout, and there's a lot of detail there, so we're going to take a look at that. Also in your on your desk was the SCA Public Issues Committee pick hot sheet for February 11th, which is obviously yesterday. So I do apologize for getting that to you. I did attend my second PIC meeting. That's the Public Issues Committee on the Sound Cities Association. It's a board, and I didn't realize basically that there were so many new council members that were elected in the last cycle. We hit the 60s, which is unusual. It's usually in the mid 50s or something like that. So there's been quite a bit of turnover in a lot of the councils. So there were a lot of new faces at the PIC committees. In fact, a lot of people were saying, "This is my first one." I didn't have them beat by much. It was my second one. But nevertheless, the Public Issues Committee is the major policy recommendation board of the Sound Cities Association. And the Sound Cities represents basically everybody but Seattle and a couple of the South End cities in King County. And so a lot of times when there's a county policy that comes out, or for that matter, a state policy that comes up, as our executive director, Robert Feldstein, says, the first call is to SCA pick and say, okay, what do you guys think? So it's a very influential board. And so that's why I've given you this handout. They've tried to basically distill down what the important things that are coming up are. And for instance, questions for your colleagues on page 1 towards the bottom there. They're trying to do a general idea gathering. What issues are important to your city council this year? What regional issues or shared city challenges do you think would benefit from discussion at the PIC? What items would you like to learn more about in trainings and lunch and learns? Those are these lunch meetings where they bring in a speaker, and pre-PICs, which are generally presentations by various different partner organizations. So if you have any things you want to want me to take to the larger PIC, please let me know, and I'm happy to forward them. Right now, I'll have to email them, of course, because I can't do it in open meeting. It was yesterday, but starting in March, you'll see this hot sheet on you. Hopefully, I'll be not giving you a paper copy, but I'll be forwarding you an electronic copy, and that way you'll have a little advance notice. Unfortunately, the PIC meetings are the Wednesday before our first council meeting of the month, so. We don't have a whole lot of time to discuss it because it's after the fact, but nevertheless, we can basically take things there and I'll bring information back. Okay. All right. Let's see. Last thing. Oh no, it was about PIC. So that was my report. So
And then
go ahead.
I can't help but plug the Third Place Commons annual community breakfast is coming up.
March 4th.
March 4th, bright and early in the morning. Be there or be square.
Thank you for the reminder. And Mayor's not here, but Mayor asked me to convey basically the appreciation to the council on working on Resolution 2061. The fact is that basically that we got such passionate responses and generally aligned. It really shows that this community can pull together even in such divisive times. And the mayor's message has always been, let's try to bring people together. And I think it really does a good job of doing that. So we can have a spirited discussion without coming to blows, which is always kind of a good thing. So, okay, and City Administrator, any highlights from your report?
Not from the report, but I do have something new to add to that report. We had a meeting yesterday morning with Sound Transit to get an update of where they stand. They're wrapping up their last 3 property acquisitions and anticipate, and I expect a gasp from Director Hoffman to make permit applications as early as April 1st of this year, no later than July 1st of this year. So we've got a lot of things to figure out with Director Heaton as well as she comes on board. As you remember, Sound Transit does provide funding that the city can bill against to bring in outside help to review these permits. And you remember there are hundreds of permits between critical areas, et cetera, that the city is going to have to review in a fairly timely fashion. So we're going to start looking at that going forward.
All right, thank you.
It's a discussion we've been having already
Mhm.
with Director Dickinson, speaking with Sound Transit, but yeah, it's something we need to get in place going forward.
Appreciate it.
Hold on.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I also want to convey my heartfelt thanks to the police department. If you've seen in the city administrator's report, some of those incidents that they have to deal with are just so heartbreaking that it takes an emotional toll. And we really appreciate the officers and you basically being on top of it. All right. Any other comments for the good of the order? All right, seeing none, I'll entertain an motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Needs a second. All right. Thank you. All right, so the city council meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.